None of this, what we're discussing here, is a conspiracy or inaccurate facts. This is the cycle of interglacial and glacial periods over the last 400,000 years. There is an absolute cycle of 100,000 years, and if you look towards zero on the right hand side of the chart, you will see that we have just enjoyed the very last moments of an interglacial period. From this point on, our Earth is going to start dramatically cooling off, and when I said we could be looking at ice all over the northern hemisphere, which will definitely stop any agricultural production in those regions for a very, very long time. How long? Over 85,000 years before we return back to a glacial cycle, and this is being caused by the Milankovitch cycle, the changing of our orbit. I know what a lot of you new to the channel will probably be thinking, well, aren't we supposed to be in global warming? Isn't CO2 the cause of all this? I'm sorry to break it to some of the new people that have joined us over the last 2-3 weeks, but the government have got it completely wrong, and that they have put a lot of our taxpayers' money into something that is not going to benefit us when we really start to see the changes of a returning to a glacial period. None of our infrastructure is geared up or set up, and there is no preparations done for this. They have put all of their eggs in the complete and utter wrong basket, and I believe that they knowingly have done this. There has been a lot of money that has been tried to be raised by COP26, COP27, and they will continue trying to raise that 100 trillion that they want to get their hands on, but it won't be spent on the right thing. It won't be spent on modifying transformers and burying these power cables deep underground so that they are well beneath the permafrost, so that they do not fail cities. This is one of the largest catastrophes humanity is ever going to see, and there is no doubt whatsoever we are returning to that very point. And I believe the magnetic reversal and the grand solar minimum are playing a key part in accelerating this, in accelerating another glacial period to return much quicker. You can see how fast, when it has peaked in interglacial periods of time, how fast it has changed direction. And with regards to CO2, you can see that it's not CO2 that drives climate, it's climate that drives CO2. You can see that climate increases, and so does the CO2 follow it. You can see that when the climate decreases in temperature, that CO2 drops alongside it afterwards. And you can also see how long of a period of time it takes to drop, pretty much the entire length of a glacial period. So there is nothing we can do tomorrow, no matter how much money we invest to scrub our atmosphere, which is impossible for humans to do. There is nothing we can do with money or with the means that we have today to reduce the CO2 to those levels, because nature is much more powerful than us mere mortals on this planet, and therefore it is able to do a better job than what we are. And it takes nature around 85,000 years to scrub that CO2 out the atmosphere. I don't know what thousand scientists these governments at the IPCC have got together to determine that this discussion has come to an end, and that there is no point looking at alternative means for climate change anymore. Yet the evidence is clearly before everybody, and the IPCC will only take into consideration temperature that goes back less than 200 years, when the record of temperature is within our hands, and we know that it is accurate because other ice core samples have been done in various parts of the world, and it all shows the same cycles. these 100,000-year cycles. There is nothing we can do other than prepare and learn to adapt and overcome to a new environment which will be here soon. People have said to me, where's the best place to go? Well, that really is for you to make that decision based on the information that you've given or you gather yourselves. You know, if you want to head to the equatorial region on this planet because you believe it is going to be warmer, well, you've got other things to consider, because those two things alone affect climate, and they in particularly affect the jet stream's behaviour, like we have recently seen. We are seeing now more extreme weather approach or turn up very quickly, where nobody is given any heads up of this, and they get caught in flash floods, 100-year records getting smashed weekly, guys. I could bring this up to, I could show you these things occurring weekly, but I dare say you see it on your mainstream media. We've seen how Vancouver was shut off by rail networks being destroyed by by floodings, washing away the foundations under the tracks. We've seen how bridges have collapsed. The infrastructure of logistics being affected by that. Tons and tons and billions of pounds worth of produce being stranded in Vancouver docks because it can't move. Well, I'm just talking about one particular area. This has been going on all over our world, and it will continue to go on for a lot longer. And like I say, the majority of us right now are sitting just mere out of luck that it hasn't had any direct consequences, as it has to a lot of other poorer people or misfortunate people that they had a living, they had their homes, and within 12 hours later all that was gone. Their livelihood was gone. Everything they'd worked all their lives for was gone and washed away. It's not just this that we are faced with. We seem, for some reason, globally to be experiencing infringements on our freedoms, and I wanted to just take a few minutes to discuss a letter that I've received off the Member of Parliament, because if you've been following us for the last few weeks, you'll also know that in November I wrote to a Member of Parliament because of this modern behaviour which we find companies like Instagram, Google, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok all involving themselves in, where they feel if they come to the conclusion that what you're saying is not accurate or misinformation or fake news, that they can override your human rights of freedom of speech, which every democracy in our world has. They feel that they are entitled to override that, and at the same time have influence and subscribed people to the tune of 4 billion people, which really is more influence than any of the governments in our world, and yet they are not held accountable for infringements of the basic human rights. And what we've done here at the Observatory is take it upon ourselves to get in touch with a Member of Parliament here in the United Kingdom. And I really encourage you to open up some dialogue with your politicians in your countries and start bringing this to the table, and do it in a manner like I am doing. Don't be bullheaded about it. Calmly approach the topic and have an open discussion. So I just want to, for the rest of this video, just read the letter that has came back. And as you guys know, there is a phone call on the 4th of February, which I'll be having an open discussion with the Member of Parliament with relationship to this matter. And of course, there is a reason why we are bringing this matter up. Is because we hope to open dialogue with other matters such as CO2 not causing climate, and what is it that our governments are doing to prepare for this oncoming glacial period. But we have to start this dialogue somewhere, and for that reason I've chosen a really important part, an opening topic to get into further discussions with regards to climate and CO2 and other things in that manner. So with that, I'll just read this letter, which was the reply to me, mention it to my MP about the infringements with regards to these big high-tech companies, and they're having no accountability for violating human rights, in that they can silence anyone they choose and not have any repercussions for doing that. Whereas if it was a government, clearly we would have a legal reason to challenge them in court over it, if that was what they was doing to us. So let's get into it. So I'm going to read out the letter that's come back from the Member of Parliament, and I'll also leave this clip up of the IPCC 2018 report, which is, a little bit opposite to what is really going on. I think you'll agree, but more than anything else, it shows you exactly those points I was pointing out with regards to that I will only examine only a couple of 100 years worth of temperature record, because simply they want us to believe that since the Industrial Revolution, 1760 or so, that we have pumped a massive amount of quantity of CO2 into the atmosphere, and by some reason temperature has increased. Yet they disregard, the 400,000 year record of glacial and interglacials, and I think that that's a big mistake on their behalf. So the letter is as follows. Thank you for contacting me about your YouTube channel. Whilst I believe in the right to free speech, I would stress that giant tech or media companies such as Google, Instagram and Twitter ultimately decide what they do or do not choose to publish on their platforms. You allude to the government having some authority to control what content goes up on these sites, but in actual fact, government has very little or no power over this. And I want my government, and I would believe that you would want your government to be able to do something about this. Because we witnessed, didn't we, last year in the elections in the United States, a president be silenced by these such companies mentioned by this Member of Parliament. And that shows you how influential they are. And that if they can be influential on things such as elections, and they can silence powerful people like presidents, then there is no stopping them, influencing, people in very large quantities, to whatever that is that they want to publish or, have put forth as an agenda. I'll just give you, for instance, let's take Facebook, for instance, who's now changed the name, I believe, to Meta, but let's just concentrate on them because they have 4 billion people around this world subscribe to them. And, they have, in some circumstances, I want to try and be correct on this, allowed people to make comments which has caused racial tension in other countries, to the point where people have been abused over, the content that was published on that site. I think that there needs to be some sort of control. I do understand that now we are seeing community guideline infringements, but when that infringement is about a topic such as climate, I think that that's overstepping the mark. Wouldn't you agree with me on that? That is clearly overstepping the mark. I completely understand when people are being discriminating or using uncalled for slander on others, but don't we have a legal system that will deal with that? If they make direct comments which are slanderous, we can challenge that in courts. So we don't need community guidelines for that, because we've already got the protection in our Western countries and other European countries and countries around the world in any case. If someone puts it in a written format, that's defamatory. If they make it in a verbal manner, that is slander. And you can challenge them in court over that. So we don't need these platforms to have that sort of, or use those community guidelines in that sense. What we want is the freedom to talk about subjects that are not harming anybody, and there is no intent to harm anybody, but merely to inform them. But more important than that, I think we are, or should be, allowed in a modern democracy to have freedom of speech. And if that freedom of speech is unlawful, then we don't need YouTube and Instagram and all that to have community guidelines to put that in check for us. We can sort it out ourselves in courts of law. Or we could bring it to their attention and explain that this is unfair in some light, and then have them do something about it. But for them to decide what is the right version of the truth and what is not is, I think, overstepping their power. And when they do silence people, I think that that's wrong. And that's what I want my government to do something about. And I would like to think that, I'm not the only one that thinks along these lines, because I think it's pretty disgusting when you can't talk about things such as COVID-19 in an alternative manner, or you can't talk about climate in an alternative manner. I think that is an infringement that these companies should be regulated for. What I'm asking for is for some legislation to be put in place that makes them responsible for their infringements on freedoms that we enjoy here in the democracy. Freedoms like our governments can't overstep that mark. We have the Human Rights Act here in the United Kingdom, which is very similar to a lot of human rights acts in other countries. Now, if a government breaches those, we can take that government to court, and they will get fined very hefty sums for doing that. So it is clearly in their interest not to infringe on those human rights because of that, because they can be directly challenged. It's so easy to do. But we are merging into a modern day society where corporations have more power than governments, or at least in this incident more influence than governments, and even prime ministers and presidents. We have witnessed that, and that is wrong, because we do not elect these companies. They simply just function, and there is nobody regulating them. And that's what we want to see, some regulation. We want them to respect human rights, at least. If they're going to have the influence of 4 billion people, half the population of this earth, don't you think that the fundamental thing they should do is respect human rights? And at the heart of any democratic system will be the freedom of speech. Even this Member of Parliament in his first paragraph I've just read to you understands that. Whilst I believe in the right to free speech himself, he says that. So I'll just go on. This can be seen more prominent in all the work Parliament and campaigners are doing at present to introduce new legislation that would hold social media companies account, or enforce them to take down inflammatory or more extreme content on their channels. For example, this has proved to be extremely difficult and in some cases impossible. So I would again emphasise that as companies like Google are private companies, it is their prerogative as to what they deem as fake news, as you refer to. I would also state that in my opinion, censorship is when suppression of speech comes directly from government or those in power, or which I can assure you is not the case here. What I would suggest is perhaps seek another platform you may be able to publish your content on. Thank you again for contacting me on this issue. Although you may disagree, I trust the above response offers further clarification on what actually lies within government's remit regarding tech companies, which is very little indeed. If you think I can help you with anything else, please do not hesitate to contact me. And again, like I said, we've got a phone conversation planned for the next 4 days where we'll be discussing this a little bit more. It will give me an opportunity to explain, what it is, my point is, and that clearly is we can't have, now organisations that are having more influence on our everyday lives, and at the same time they rely on those human rights to protect themselves. Believe it or not, you wouldn't believe it, but they do. But then on the other hand, they are not accountable for breaching those human rights, as they have done clearly on this channel and other channels and in other arenas as well. Which is, I think, if we are going to keep our democracy in this modern times, then legislation has to be alongside that. And I think what little could we ask is if they just respected human rights. I think you would agree with me that that would be something. I just wanted to go over just one other issue which I think it should be brought up as well, and as we have now opened a dialogue with a Member of Parliament, there's no reason why we shouldn't mention a few other issues over the coming months, and this is hopefully going to continue until we do at least get them to see where we're standing with this. And like I say, guys, it shouldn't just be us here at the Observatory that are interested in keeping our freedoms and our democracy intact as we merge into a future, whatever that lies, what future that will be, even if governments are in continuity with the next approaching glacial period. But nevertheless, we are certainly seeing those infringements come thick and thin now, more than we ever have done. Just look at what Canada is doing today. That should set an example for what we should be doing all over the world. They're protesting, and ordinary Canadians have came out in protest against the government, to the fact today that their Prime Minister has had to seek secret location to hide. I think he was trying to issue £10,000 fines for unvaccinated people. Again, an infringement. It's actually assault when you force people to have injections, and we are slowly gaining some of the ground back. Here in the UK, they said to the medical staff in the NHS working in the hospitals that if they weren't vaccinated, they pretty much couldn't come back into work. Over 70,000 people are unvaccinated that work for the NHS or in these hospitals, and as a result of them not being vaccinated and holding their ground, the government is having to do a large U-turn on that policy, which is good. But we want them to go a little bit further than that, don't we, guys? And hopefully in the next topic that we're going to talk about, I think you'll agree with me, once again something needs to be done. So I'm talking about the governments are failing to protect businesses and its citizens when they allow corporations like Amazon to monopolise industries and put hundreds, if not thousands and millions of companies out of business with their monopoly. And it has become apparent to a lot of people that there is a pattern to their business strategy, and that is, first of all, as most people know, Amazon started off selling books, but the way they monopolised that industry was by selling the books off free. Jeff Bezos lost billions of pounds in doing that, but then he put everybody in the book selling industry pretty much out of business within a short space of time, and therefore ended up owning the monopoly on sales of books. And he has applied that strategy across many sectors of industry. And the problem is with this is that where millions of people employed other millions of people in their jobs, that no longer is the case. He's put them out of business. And it seems greedy, it seems wrong that governments never intervened and said this is clearly a strategy of monopoly, because exactly that is what he's done. And there is no fair competition, and for that Amazon should have been fined. I mean, Amazon's got a lot of problems and seems to be getting away with blue murder right now. Jeff Bezos' business has, just before Christmas, killed people in that tornado through forcing them to stay in that factory. Yet he will not be held accountable for manslaughter in any way. This is what happens when you end up with a two-tier system. Somebody in the authorities and in the governments are clearly allowing him to get away with this, because it is not fair competition when you sell the same products as other people at zero profit just in order to monopolise that particular part of the industry. He is doing it across the range. He wants the world to purchase stuff only off him, and he wants to be the only person you can buy off him. But the problem with that is that your selection of choice of products will be censored by him. It will be him that dictates, or his company that dictates, what products actually come onto the market. There will be no free market if this continues. He's just one of the companies that are getting away with this. You know, why aren't our governments protecting us anymore? Why does it feel like they're not protecting us anymore? Why are they leaving us vulnerable to the Jeff Bezos of the world? I said this in the last video, and I think I'll end it on this note, guys, that, you know, in the 1940s, we stamped out one Adolf Hitler. And by God, am I wrong in saying we now have another 30 to 40 of those Hitlers? I just want to end by saying thank you to those people that have helped support us to this point in time. And you know, there is a link down there if you want to help support us in the future. And you know, the only other thing I guess to say is, you know, guys, give me your opinions on the things we've talked about in this upload, and you know, take care of your loved ones. As always, bye for now.